I was 17 when they brought me to the convent of Santa Maria de las Sombras, a fortress of stone and silence perched upon the cliffs of Castile. My father, a merchant grown wealthy from the spice trade, had decided my fate with the stroke of a quill, a generous dowry to the church, and I would become a bride of Christ. I wept the first night, my tears soaking the coarse pillow, but by morning I had learned the first lesson of convent life. Tears are a luxury we cannot afford. 3 years have passed since that day. I am Sister Beatrice now, though in my heart I still feel like the girl who loved to run through meadows with wildflowers in her hair. The convent has become my world, its high walls my horizon, its bells my clock, its prayers my language. I have learned to move through these corridors like a ghost, my footsteps silent on the cold stone floors, my eyes downcast, my hands folded within my habit. I have learned to find God in the monotony of daily prayer, in the scratch of quill against parchment as I copy scripture, in the taste of plain bread and the chill of dawn vigils. But I have also learned that the human heart is a rebellious thing, and no amount of prayer can still its wayward beating. It began on a morning in late autumn, when Brother Tomas announced during chapter that an inquisitor would be visiting our region. The Dominican order had sent him to investigate rumors of heresy that had been whispered through the villages like plague wind. Our abbess, Mother Superior Catalina, a woman whose face seemed carved from the same stone as our walls, informed us that we must prepare for his inspection. We were to review our devotions, examine our consciences, and ensure that our faith remained pure and untainted. "The Holy Office cometh to protect us from the devil's snares," she intoned, her voice echoing through the chapter house. "Let none among you harbor doubt or sin. Confession shall cleanse the soul ere the inquisitor arriveth." A collective shudder passed through the assembled sisters. We had all heard tales of the inquisitors, men of iron will and merciless judgment, who could see into the darkest corners of a sinner's heart. I felt my own heart quicken with fear, though I knew not what I had to fear. I had committed no heresy. I prayed my hours faithfully, attended every mass, took communion with reverence. Yet something in the abbess's words made my skin prickle with unease. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in my narrow cell, listening to the wind howl against the shutters, and wondered what manner of man this inquisitor might be. Would he be old and withered, with eyes like hot coals? Would he be fat and cruel, delighting in the suffering of others? Or would he be something worse, something I could not yet imagine? The answer came 3 days hence, when he arrived at our gates. His name was Father Rodrigo de Leon, and he was nothing like I had expected. He was young, perhaps 30 years of age, with dark hair that curled slightly at his temples, and eyes the color of winter storms. His face was lean and angular, marked by both intelligence and something else I could not name. He wore the black and white habit of the Dominican order, and he carried himself with the bearing of a man who had never known doubt. I first saw him in the courtyard as I returned from the scriptorium, my arms laden with freshly copied psalters. He stood speaking with Mother Catalina, and though I kept my eyes properly lowered, I felt his gaze sweep across me like a blade. It lasted but a moment, yet it left me breathless, as though he had looked not at my face, but into my very soul. "Who is that sister?" I heard him ask, his voice deep and measured. "Sister Beatrice," the abbess replied, "one of our younger sisters lately of the novitiate, a diligent copyist and faithful in her devotions." "Indeed," he said, and I felt his eyes upon me still as I hurried past, my cheeks burning beneath my veil. Father Rodrigo established his quarters in the monastery adjacent to our convent, as was proper, but his presence permeated our lives like incense smoke. He interviewed each sister privately, questioning us about our faith, our prayers, our dreams. Some emerged from these interviews pale and shaking. Others seemed relieved. When my turn came, I entered the small chamber that had been set aside for his use with trembling hands. He sat behind a simple wooden table, a large Bible open before him, a quill and parchment at his side. The room smelled of beeswax candles and old books. When I entered, he gestured for me to sit upon a stool opposite him. "Sister Beatrice," he said, and my name upon his lips sent in strange warmth through my veins. "I am told thou art a faithful servant of our Lord." "I strive to be, Father," I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed upon my folded hands. "Look at me, child." I raised my eyes slowly, and the moment our gazes met, something shifted in the air between us. His eyes were not cruel, as I had feared, but penetrating, as though he sought something hidden deep within me. "How long hast thou been within these walls?" he asked. 3 years, Father. "And dost thou harbor any doubts concerning our holy faith? Any questions that trouble thy sleep?" I hesitated. To admit doubt was dangerous, yet to lie to an inquisitor was surely a graver sin. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "I wonder why God hath ordained such suffering in this world. When I see the poor at our gates, or hear of wars and pestilence, I question his purpose." I expected rebuke, but instead, Father Rodrigo leaned forward slightly, his expression intent. "That is not heresy, sister. That is the questioning of a thinking soul. Tell me, what answerest thou thyself when such questions arise?" I remind myself that God's ways are beyond mortal understanding, that faith requireth we trust even when we comprehend not. A wise answer. He paused, studying me in a way that made my heart race. "Thou art educated, then? Thou canst read and write?" "Aye, Father." My father ensured I received instruction ere I took my vows. "Show me thy hands." Confused, I extended my hands across the table. He did not touch them, but examined them closely. The ink stains upon my fingers, the small callus where I held my quill. "A scribe's hands," he murmured. "Beautiful in their purpose." The word beautiful hung in the air between us, inappropriate and electrifying. I snatched my hands back, folding them once more in my lap. "Father, thou art dismissed, Sister Beatrice. Thy faith appeareth sound. Continue in thy devotions." I fled from that room as though pursued by demons, my heart pounding so loudly I feared the entire convent could hear it. In the days that followed, I tried to avoid Father Rodrigo, but our paths seemed destined to cross. I would glimpse him in the cloister, pacing slowly with his hands clasped behind his back, his lips moving in silent prayer. I would see him at Mass, his profile stern and beautiful in the candlelight, and always, I felt his eyes seeking me out across the distance. The autumn deepened into early winter. The stone walls grew colder, and we wore our heaviest wool habits. One evening, as I worked alone in the scriptorium after Vespers, copying a passage from the Book of Psalms, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up to find Father Rodrigo standing in the doorway. "Forgive the intrusion, sister," he said. I sought a quiet place for contemplation, and did not realize this chamber was occupied. "I can depart, Father," I said, beginning to gather my materials. "Nay," he raised a hand. "Continue thy work. I shall not disturb thee." But his very presence was a disturbance. He moved to the far corner of the room, where a small altar stood, and knelt in prayer. I tried to return to my copying, but my hand shook, and I made several errors that required scraping away. The scratch of my knife against parchment seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. After what felt like an eternity, he rose and approached my desk. "May I see thy work?" I nodded, unable to speak. He leaned over my shoulder, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, smell the scent of frankincense that clung to his habit. His finger traced the lines of script I had penned. "Thy hand is exquisite," he said softly. "Each letter formed with such care and devotion. This is prayer made visible, Sister Beatrice." "I thank thee, Father," I whispered, scarcely breathing. He did not move away. Instead, he remained there, his presence overwhelming, his breath stirring the air near my ear. "Tell me," he said, his voice barely audible, "dost thou find peace in this life, in these walls?" The question was dangerous, far more dangerous than his theological inquiries had been, because it invited truth, and truth was the most perilous thing of all. "I find purpose," I said carefully, "and in purpose there is a kind of peace, but not happiness. Happiness is not promised to us in this life, Father, only in the life to come." He straightened, moving away at last, and I could breathe again. Yet sometimes I wonder if God doth not wish for us to taste some small measure of joy, even in this vale of tears. Else why would he have created beauty? Why would he have given us hearts capable of feeling? The pause before that last word was heavy with meaning. I did not dare look at him. "I know not, Father," I said. "Such questions are beyond my understanding." "Methinks thou understandest more than thou admittest," he said, and then he left, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, leaving me alone with my trembling hands and racing heart. That night, I lay awake, tormented by confusion and something else, something that felt dangerously like longing. I told myself I was being foolish, that Father Rodrigo was simply a man of intellect who appreciated scholarship, that I was reading meanings into his words that were not there. But my body knew better. My body remembered the warmth of his nearness. the timbre of his voice, the way his eyes had held mine. I rose before dawn and went to the chapel, kneeling before the altar in the darkness. "Forgive me, Lord," I prayed. "Forgive these sinful thoughts. Help me to remember my vows, my purpose, my devotion to Thee alone." But even as I prayed, I knew my prayers were hollow, because what I felt was not something I wanted to be delivered from. It was something I wanted to sink into, like warm water, like sleep, like sin. The next day brought the feast of St. Catherine, and with it a special Mass. Father Rodrigo celebrated, his voice ringing through the chapel with authority and passion. He preached about temptation, about the devil's subtle snares, about the importance of vigilance against our own weaknesses. Every word seemed aimed at me, though I knew that was my guilt speaking. After the Mass, Mother Catalina announced that Father Rodrigo had completed his inquiries and found no evidence of heresy within our community. There was a collective sigh of relief among the sisters, but the abbess added that he would remain with us another fortnight to provide spiritual guidance and hear confessions. My heart sank and soared simultaneously. 2 days later, I went to confession. The confessional was a narrow box that smelled of old wood and fear. I knelt in the darkness, listening to the rustle of Father Rodrigo's robes on the other side of the screen. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," I began, the familiar words feeling strange in my mouth. "It hath been 1 week since my last confession." "Speak, my child," came his voice, slightly muffled by the screen but unmistakable. I confessed small sins, an unkind thought toward another sister, distraction during prayer, a moment of pride in my scribal work. But I could not confess the greatest sin of all, that I thought of him constantly, that I lay awake imagining his touch, that I had begun to question whether my vows were chains or choices. "Is there aught else?" he asked when I fell silent. "Nay, Father," I lied. There was a long pause. Then, "Sister Beatrice, I know thy voice, and I know when a soul holdeth back its deepest burden." My breath caught in my throat. "Father, I look not upon this as inquisitor to accused," he said, his voice gentle, "but as priest to penitent. What troubleth thee? Speak freely." The darkness of the confessional gave me courage I would not have had in the light. "I have feelings," I whispered. "Feelings that I ought not to have, for someone I ought not to think upon." Another pause, and I could hear his breathing, quick and shallow. "This person," he said carefully, "is he here, within these walls?" "Aye," I breathed. "And dost thou believe these feelings to be returned?" The question was improper, far beyond the bounds of normal confession. We both knew it, and yet I answered, "I know not, I dare not know, but sometimes I think, I fear, I hope, Sister Beatrice." His voice was strained now. "Rough. Such feelings are natural. We are flesh and blood, despite our vows. The sin lieth not in the feeling, but in the action. Then I have not sinned? Not yet." The implication hung heavy between us. Not yet. But we both knew how easily not yet could become already. "For thy penance," he said, his voice steadying, "say 3 decades of the rosary and meditate upon the virtue of holy obedience. Go in peace and sin no more." I thank thee, Father. I fled the confessional, my head spinning. Had we just confessed our mutual attraction in the guise of sacrament? Or had I imagined the tension in his voice, the loaded meaning of his words? That night, unable to sleep, I rose and walked through the silent corridors. The convent was peaceful in the deep hours, lit only by the occasional rushlight. I made my way to the library, thinking to lose myself in reading. But when I opened the door, I found Father Rodrigo already there. He stood before the window, his back to me, gazing out at the moonlit courtyard. At the sound of the door, he turned, and our eyes met in the dimness. "Sister Beatrice," he said, and there was resignation in his voice, as though he had been expecting me, or dreading me, or both. "Forgive me, Father. I did not mean to intrude." "Thou art not intruding." He gestured to the room. "The library belongeth to all who seek knowledge." I should have left. Every rule of propriety, every vow I had taken, demanded that I turn and flee. Instead, I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. "Why art thou here, Father?" I asked. "At this hour, when all should be abed?" He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "For the same reason as thou, I suspect. Because sleep eludeth me, because my thoughts are troubled." "What troubleth an inquisitor?" The question came out more bitter than I intended. "Surely thou hast the strength to master any wayward thought. Dost thou truly believe that?" He moved toward me, and in the moonlight his face was pale and beautiful. Dost thou think that because I wear this habit, because I carry the authority of the Holy Office, I am immune to what, Father? To thee. The word fell between us like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything. To the sound of thy voice, to the grace of thy movements, to the intelligence in thy eyes, to the sin of wanting what I cannot have. I could scarcely breathe. Father Rodrigo. Nay, let me speak whilst I still possess the courage. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture so human it made my heart ache. I came to this place to root out heresy, to serve God and his church. But instead I have found something that shaketh the very foundation of my faith. I look at thee, and I see what my life might have been, had I chosen differently. I see beauty and grace and a soul that matcheth mine. And I know that this is the devil's work, designed to lead me from my path, yet knowing this changeth nothing. I am lost, Sister Beatrice, utterly and completely lost. Tears stung my eyes. Then we are both damned, I whispered, for I feel the same. Every moment since thou arrived I have thought of nothing but thee. I pray for deliverance, but my prayers are empty. I confess my sins, but the greatest sin I cannot speak aloud, because to speak it would make it real, and if it is real, then everything I have built here, everything I have convinced myself I wanted, crumbleth to dust. We stood facing each other across the library, neither daring to close the distance, both knowing that if we did, there would be no return. What are we to do? I asked, my voice breaking. I know not, he said. I know only that I should leave this place, tomorrow, before something happeneth that neither of us can take back. Then leave, I said, though my heart screamed in protest. Go, and forget thou ever knew me. Return to thy work, thy calling. Let us both return to the paths we chose. Canst thou do that? He asked. Canst thou forget? Nay, I admitted, but I can pretend. I have become skilled at pretending. He crossed the space between us then. Moving so quickly I had no time to react. He stopped mere inches from me, close enough that I could feel his breath upon my face, see the torment in his storm-gray eyes. I would kiss thee, he said roughly. God forgive me, but I would take thy face in my hands and kiss thee until neither of us could breathe. I would, he closed his eyes, his jaw clenching, but I will not, because once I begin, I shall not be able to stop, and thou deservest better than to be the ruin of a man who should have been stronger. And if I wish to be thy ruin, the words escaped before I could stop them, shameless and honest. His eyes flew open, dark with desire and anguish. Then thou art more dangerous than any heretic I have ever hunted. For a long moment we stood frozen, balanced on the knife's edge between salvation and damnation. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped back. Go, he said hoarsely. Return to thy cell. Pray for us both, and stay away from me, Sister Beatrice, for if thou dost not, I cannot answer for what I might do. I fled, my vision blurred with tears, my body shaking with the force of denied desire. I returned to my cell and threw myself upon my narrow bed, biting my sleeve to muffle my sobs. I had been so close enough to feel the heat of him, to imagine the taste of his lips, and we had turned away. We had chosen virtue over sin, duty over desire, but it felt like the cruelest choice I had ever made. The next day, I learned that Father Rodrigo had not left as he had threatened. Instead, he had requested an audience with Mother Catalina and announced his intention to remain at our convent for the winter months, offering his services as spiritual director and chaplain. The abbess, flattered and pleased, had agreed immediately. When I heard the news, I did not know whether to weep with relief or despair. The winter deepened, and with it the strange dance between Father Rodrigo and myself. We maintained proper distance in public, never speaking beyond what was necessary, never allowing our eyes to meet. But there were moments, stolen glances during Mass, the brush of hands when he gave me communion, the way he lingered near the scriptorium when he knew I was working there, that spoke louder than any words. And then there were the letters. It began innocently enough. Father Rodrigo asked if I might copy a particularly difficult theological text for the monastery's library. I agreed, of course. It was my duty. But when I received the manuscript, I found a small note tucked between the pages, written in his precise hand. Sister B, thy work is a balm to my troubled soul. When I read thy script, I hear thy voice speaking the sacred words, and I am at peace. God forgive me. R. I should have destroyed it. Instead, I pressed it between the pages of my personal prayer book, where I could unfold it and read it in the quiet darkness of my cell. I penned a response. Tucking it into the finished copy of the text, I returned to him. Father R., thy words are dangerous sweetness. I ought not to welcome them, yet I hoard them like a miser hoards gold. I pray for strength I do not wish to have. B. Thus began our secret correspondence. Notes hidden in manuscripts. Brief messages folded small and left in agreed-upon locations, behind a loose stone in the cloister wall, beneath a particular book in the library, inside the hollowed base of a statue of St. Jerome. We were careful, always careful, never writing anything that could not be explained as innocent spiritual guidance. Yet the subtext burned through every word. The Song of Solomon hath new meaning for me now. How could I have thought it merely allegory? Every verse speaketh of thee, R. I dreamed of thee last night. When I woke, I felt such shame that I could not take communion this morning. Yet even now, I wish I could dream that dream again. B. If we are sinning, let it be a sin of the heart only. That much, at least, I can perhaps confess when my time cometh, but I fear what I might do if ever we found ourselves truly alone. R. Alone is all I think about. Alone is what I crave. Alone would be both heaven and hell. B. It was madness. This correspondence. Each note was evidence that could condemn us both, yet neither of us could stop. The notes were our only outlet for feelings that threatened to consume us entirely. Then came the night of Epiphany. There was a great storm, the worst of the winter. Wind howled around the convent like a beast seeking entry, and snow fell so thickly we could barely see the courtyard from the windows. After Compline, Mother Catalina announced that the sisters should remain in the dormitory for safety, as the cold was too dangerous for our usual midnight prayers. But I could not sleep. The storm's fury matched my own inner turmoil, and I lay awake, listening to the wind and thinking of Father Rodrigo, alone in his quarters across the courtyard. Was he thinking of me? Was he, too, unable to sleep? Against all reason, I rose and dressed, pulling my heaviest cloak over my habit. I told myself I was simply going to the chapel to pray, that I needed the solace of the sacred space. But my feet carried me elsewhere, through the covered walkway that connected the convent to the monastery, through passages I should not have known, to the small cell that served as Father Rodrigo's quarters. I stood before his door, my hand raised to knock, knowing that if I did, there would be no return from what followed. Before I could decide, the door opened. He stood there, fully dressed as though he, too, had been unable to sleep, a candle in his hand. The sight of me seemed to drain all color from his face. Sister Beatrice, he breathed. Thou shouldst not be here. I know it, I said. Yet here I stand. He looked up and down the corridor, then pulled me quickly inside, closing the door behind us. His cell was small and spare, a narrow bed, a desk, a crucifix upon the wall. The candle cast dancing shadows. This is madness, he said, but he made no move to send me away. If anyone should discover thee here, let them discover me, I said recklessly. I am past caring. All winter I have been dying slowly, Father Rodrigo, dying from the weight of what I cannot have, what I cannot even speak aloud, and I am tired, so very tired of pretending that my heart is not breaking. Dost thou think it is any easier for me? He set the candle down with a hand that shook. I am sworn to God, to the Church, to the Holy Office. I have devoted my life to rooting out sin and error, and now I am become that which I was meant to destroy, a man who placeth his own desires above his sacred duty. Then we are matched in our damnation, I whispered. He moved toward me then, his eyes blazing in the candlelight. Dost thou understand what thou art asking? What this would mean? I understand nothing any more, I confessed, except that I love thee. God help me. I love thee, and that love is stronger than my fear of hell itself. He reached out and, with trembling fingers, touched my face, the first time our skin had met. The sensation was overwhelming, and I gasped, leaning into his palm. Beatrice, he said, my Christian name naked and beautiful in his mouth. My beautiful, damned Beatrice. And then he kissed me. It was nothing like I had imagined. It was not gentle or sweet. It was desperate and hungry, the kiss of two people who had denied themselves too long. His hands tangled in my veil, pulling it loose, my arms wrapped around his neck, drawing him closer, closer, as though I could pull him into my very soul. We broke apart, gasping, and he pressed his forehead to mine. "We cannot," he said, even as his hands roamed my back. "We must not." "Then tell me to leave," I challenged. "Send me away, and I shall go." But he could not. Instead, he kissed me again, and we stumbled backward until we fell upon his narrow bed. The storm raged outside, but inside his cell. But there was only heat and need, and the breaking of vows we had both sworn to keep. I will not detail what passed between us that night. Some sins are too sacred to speak aloud. But I will say this. When dawn came, gray and cold through the small window, I knew I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. I had tasted paradise, and nothing, not prayer, not penance, not even the threat of eternal damnation, could make me regret it. Father Rodrigo lay beside me, his dark hair disheveled, his face peaceful in a way I had never seen before. But as I watched, his eyes opened, and I saw reality crash over him like a wave. "What have we done?" he whispered. "What we were always going to do," I said softly. "What was perhaps inevitable from the moment thou first arrived." He sat up, running his hands through his hair. "I am ruined. We are both ruined." I agreed, "but I find I care not. Last night was worth any price." He turned to me, his expression anguished. "How canst thou speak so? We have committed mortal sin, the very worst kind of betrayal. I, a priest and inquisitor. Thou, a bride of Christ. There is no forgiveness for what we have done. Then let us be damned together," I said fiercely. "I would rather spend eternity in hell with thee than a single day more in this purgatory of denial." He pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could scarcely breathe. "I love thee," he said into my hair. "God forgive me. I love thee more than my own salvation." We remained thus until the bell rang for lauds, and reality could be denied no longer. I slipped back to the convent through the gray dawn, my hair hastily rebraided, my veil pulled low to hide my face. If any sister saw me, she said nothing. Perhaps they were still abed, or perhaps they simply did not wish to know. The days that followed were a strange kind of agony. In public, we maintained our careful distance, but our eyes spoke what our mouths could not. And at night, when the convent slept, I would make my way to his cell, and we would damn ourselves anew with every touch, every kiss, every whispered word of love. We knew it could not last. Such secrets never do. But we were drunk on each other, reckless with desire, and we convinced ourselves that we could somehow continue this way forever. It was Sister Clara who discovered us. She was an old nun, nearly blind, who often wandered the corridors at night when sleep eluded her. On a cold February night, she took a wrong turn and found herself in the monastery wing. She heard sounds from Father Rodrigo's cell, sounds that could not be mistaken for prayer. When she pressed her ear to the door, she heard my voice, breathless and pleading. The next morning, she went to Mother Catalina. I was copying a manuscript in the scriptorium when two of the burlier lay sisters came for me. They gave no explanation, simply took my arms and escorted me to the abbess's chambers. Father Rodrigo was already there, his face pale but composed. Mother Catalina stood before us like an avenging angel, her face terrible with righteous fury. "How long?" she demanded. "How long hath this abomination been taking place under my very roof?" Neither of us answered. What was there to say? "Speak," she thundered. "Confess thy sins that they may be judged." "Since Epiphany," Father Rodrigo said quietly. "The fault is mine alone, Mother. Sister Beatrice is innocent. I seduced her, used my authority to—" "Nay," I cried. "He lieth to protect me. I went to him. I initiated—" "Silence, both of you." The abbess's hand cracked across my face, the blow so hard I tasted blood. "Thou art a disgrace to thy habit, to thy vows, to God himself, and thou," she turned on Father Rodrigo with venom, "thou, who camest here as an inquisitor, guardian of faith and morals, thou art worse than any heretic, for thou knowest better. Thou hast corrupted an innocent girl." "She is not a girl," Father Rodrigo said, his voice cold and hard. "She is a woman of intelligence and will, and I have corrupted nothing. We have loved each other, and if that be sin, then we sin gladly." His words inflamed the abbess further. "Thou wilt both face the consequences of thy actions. Sister Beatrice, thou art confined to thy cell pending judgment. Thou shalt speak to no one, see no one. And thou, Father Rodrigo, I am writing to thy superiors in the Dominican order. They shall decide thy fate. And if they decide upon death," he asked calmly, "then thou shalt have earned it." We were separated then, I was dragged to my cell and locked inside. Through the thick wooden door, I could hear the abbess giving orders. Father Rodrigo was to be watched constantly. I was to be given only bread and water. No one was to communicate with either of us under pain of severe penance. I sat upon my bed, touching my swollen face, and felt strangely at peace. Yes, we had been discovered. Yes, we would face punishment, perhaps even death, but I could not regret what we had shared. In a life of denial and duty, we had found brief moments of genuine happiness. Was that not worth any price? The days crept by in my cell. I was given no word of Father Rodrigo, no information about what was being decided. I prayed, but not for forgiveness. I prayed only that he might be spared, that whatever punishment came would fall upon me alone. On the 7th day of my confinement, Sister Agnes slipped into my cell during the changing of my guards. She was a young sister, perhaps 18, with a kind face. "I cannot stay long," she whispered urgently. "But thou must know. They are sending Father Rodrigo away. Tomorrow, at dawn, he is to be taken to Toledo, to stand trial before the inquisitorial tribunal." "Nay," I breathed, my heart shattering. "What shall they do to him?" "I know not. But the rumors say, they say he might be burned." Her eyes filled with tears. "And thee, Sister Beatrice, thou art to be sent to a cloistered convent in the mountains, a place where nuns who have disgraced themselves are sent to repent. Thou shalt never be allowed to leave." After she had gone, I sat in the darkness and knew I could not let this happen. Father Rodrigo would be tortured, tried, and executed for loving me, and I would be buried alive in some remote prison convent, spending the rest of my days in penance for the only true joy I had ever known. Nay, if we were to be punished, let it be together. If we were to die, let us die as we had lived these past weeks, united in our love and our defiance. That night, when the convent slept, I used a hairpin to pick the lock of my cell, a skill my brother had taught me as a child, when we would play at being thieves. The corridor was dark and silent. I made my way to the small cell where I knew Father Rodrigo was being held. His door was guarded by a lay brother, an old man who slept in his chair. I crept past him and slipped inside. Father Rodrigo sat upon his bed, his head in his hands. When he heard me enter, he looked up, and the despair in his face transformed to hope, then terror. "Beatrice, thou shouldst not be here. They shall add to thy punishment." "I care not," I said, kneeling before him and taking his hands in mine. "I have come to free thee. We must flee this place tonight, whilst we still draw breath." "Flee?" He stared at me as though I had gone mad. "To where? There is nowhere in all Christendom we could hide. The Church's arm is long, and my face is known throughout the realm." "Then we shall go beyond Christendom," I said desperately, "to the Moorish lands, or across the sea. Somewhere they cannot reach us." He cupped my face in his hands, his thumb tracing my bruised cheek where the abbess had struck me. "My brave, foolish love, dost thou truly believe we could simply vanish? That we could build a life together whilst being hunted as apostates and fugitives? I believe that any life with thee is better than a life apart," I said fiercely. "They mean to burn thee, Rodrigo, to tie thee to a stake and watch thee writhe in flames whilst holy men pray for thy soul. And they mean to bury me alive in some mountain prison, where I shall spend decades contemplating my sin. Is that truly a better fate than trying at least to escape?" His jaw clenched, and I saw the war raging behind his eyes. Duty against desire, resignation against rebellion. Finally, he pulled me close, pressing a fierce kiss to my forehead. "Very well," he said. "If we are to be damned, let us at least die free." We moved quickly then. Father Rodrigo had a small cache of coins, funds provided for his work as inquisitor, which he gathered into a leather pouch. I returned to my cell long enough to retrieve my own meager possessions, the prayer book containing our secret letters, which I could not bear to leave behind, and the warm cloak I had worn the first night I came to him. We met in the stables, where the horses stirred restlessly in their stalls. Father Rodrigo, who had some skill with horses from his youth, saddled 2 of the gentler mares. The stable boy slept in the loft above, and we moved in silence, terrified that any sound might wake him. As we led the horses toward the gate, my heart pounded so loudly I was certain it would wake the entire convent. But God, or perhaps the devil, smiled upon us that night. The gate was barred but not locked, the lay brother who should have been watching having abandoned his post for warmer quarters. We mounted and rode into the darkness, the snow beginning to fall once more, covering our tracks almost as quickly as we made them. For 3 days we rode south, avoiding the main roads, sleeping in abandoned shepherds' huts, and buying food from isolated farmsteads where none would think to question a priest and his sister traveling together. Father Rodrigo had removed the distinctive Dominican habit, wearing instead a simple brown robe that could belong to any wandering friar. I had shed my veil and dressed in the plain woolens of a peasant woman. We spoke little during those days, too exhausted and too terrified of pursuit to do more than focus on survival. But at night, huddled together for warmth, we would hold each other, drawing comfort from the simple fact of being together. On the 4th day, we reached a small coastal town, where ships departed regularly for North Africa and the ports beyond. Father Rodrigo used most of our remaining coins to secure passage on a merchant vessel bound for Tangier. The captain asked no questions, interested only in the weight of silver in his palm. We set sail at dawn, and as the Spanish coast receded behind us, I felt something loosen in my chest. For the first time since our discovery, I could breathe fully. We were not safe. Perhaps we would never truly be safe, but we were free. The crossing took 5 days. The sea was rough, and I spent much of the journey retching over the side of the ship. But Father Rodrigo never left me, holding my hair back and murmuring words of comfort in Latin and Spanish both. When I could eat again, he brought me small pieces of dried fruit and made me laugh with stories of his childhood in Leon, before he had ever thought to join the church. I wanted to be a scholar, he confessed one night as we lay together in the cramped space the captain had allotted us, to study the ancient texts, to learn Greek and Arabic, to understand the world through knowledge rather than faith. Why didst thou not? I asked, tracing patterns on his chest. My father decided otherwise. I was the 3rd son. No inheritance awaited me. The church was the only path to advancement. He paused. But I grew to love it, or thought I did. The order, the certainty, the sense of purpose. I convinced myself that I had a vocation, that God had called me. And now? Now I know not what I believe, he admitted. If God is love, as the scriptures teach, how can he condemn what we have found? Yet if he is justice, as the church proclaims, then we have committed the gravest of sins. He pulled me closer. Perhaps it mattereth not. Perhaps heaven and hell are but stories we tell ourselves. All I know with certainty is that thou art real, and my love for thee is real, and that must suffice. When we finally reached Tangier, the sight of the white buildings gleaming in the North African sun took my breath away. This was a world utterly foreign to me, the calls to prayer echoing from the minarets, the exotic spices scenting the air, the flowing robes and strange tongue of the people who thronged the narrow streets. We found lodging in a small house owned by a Christian merchant who had fled Spain decades earlier. He asked no questions about our past, and we offered no explanations. In this city of exiles and refugees, we were simply 2 more souls seeking sanctuary. Father Rodrigo, though I could no longer think of him by that title, found work as a translator. His knowledge of Latin, Spanish, and some Arabic made him valuable to merchants conducting business across language barriers. I took in sewing and mending, skills I had learned in the convent. The work was humble, the pay modest, but it was honest, and it was ours. At night, in our small rented room, we would lie together and speak of the future. Should we remain in Tangier or push further into the unknown? Should we marry, though any marriage we contracted would be invalid in the eyes of the church? Should we continue to call ourselves by our Christian names, or adopt new identities entirely? I wish to marry thee, Rodrigo said one evening, perhaps 2 months after our arrival. Not before a priest, perhaps, but before God, the God I choose to believe in, the God of love rather than judgment. I wish to pledge myself to thee formally, to make vows I intend to keep. We have already broken vows we swore to keep, I reminded him gently. Aye, but those were vows forced upon us by circumstance and duty. These would be vows chosen freely, spoken from the heart. He took my hands. Beatrice, wilt thou be my wife, in this life and whatever cometh after? I could not speak through my tears, so I simply nodded, and we held each other as the call to evening prayer drifted through our window, a reminder that we were far from the world we had known. We married ourselves in the small courtyard behind our house, beneath a sky brilliant with stars. There were no witnesses save God himself, whichever version of God might be listening. Rodrigo spoke first, his voice steady and sure. Beatrice, I pledge thee my love, my loyalty, and my life. I shall honor thee, protect thee, and cherish thee until death doth part us. Thou art my wife, my companion, my beloved. Before heaven and earth, I claim thee as mine own. Then I spoke, my voice trembling but sincere. Rodrigo, I pledge thee my heart, my trust, and my devotion. I shall stand beside thee in joy and sorrow, in poverty and plenty, in this world and the next. Thou art my husband, my partner, my love. Before all that is holy, I give myself to thee. We sealed our vows with a kiss, and though no priest blessed us, though no witnesses cheered, though no church bells rang, in that moment, I felt more married, more bound, more complete than I ever had when I took my vows as a bride of Christ. The months turned into a year, then 2. We built a simple life in Tangier, neither grand nor miserable, but content. Rodrigo's translation work grew, and soon he was employed regularly by several prominent merchants. I began teaching the daughters of Christian families to read and write, using the skills I had honed in the scriptorium. We made friends among the exile community, other Spaniards who had fled the Inquisition, Jews who had been expelled, Muslims who had escaped Christian persecution. In our little corner of North Africa, we were all refugees together, and there was a strange kind of fellowship in our shared displacement. But always, there was the fear. Every time we heard that a ship had arrived from Spain, we would hold our breath, wondering if this was the vessel that carried our pursuers. Every time we saw a Dominican habit in the streets, for even here, the church had its reach, we would duck into doorways and hide until the danger passed. And then, one day, the danger found us. It was a morning like any other. I had gone to the market to buy bread and dates, my basket over my arm, my head covered as was proper in this land. As I bargained with a fruit seller, I heard a voice behind me, a voice speaking Spanish with the hard Castilian accent of home. Sister Beatriz. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Slowly, I turned to face the speaker. It was Father Tomas, the priest who had served at our convent, who had announced Father Rodrigo's arrival all those years ago. He was older now, his face lined with hardship, but his eyes were the same, flat and cold and certain. Thou art a difficult woman to find, he said mildly, but the Holy Office is patient, and the Church never forgets. I looked around desperately for escape, but he had chosen his moment well. The market was crowded, and 2 other men, lay brothers by their dress, flanked him on either side. Where is he? Father Tomas asked. Where is the apostate Rodrigo de Leon? I know not of whom thou speakest, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Come, sister. We have not come all this way to play games. Thou and thy paramour have been declared heretics and apostates. There is a warrant for thy arrest, signed by the Grand Inquisitor himself. Thou canst make this easy or difficult, but the outcome shall be the same. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted at the edge of the market. Rodrigo had seen us from across the square and was pushing through the crowd, his face desperate. Run, Beatriz, he shouted. Run! But there was nowhere to run. The lay brothers seized me, their grips like iron on my arms. Rodrigo fought his way toward us, but more men appeared. A whole contingent, I realized, had been lying in wait. They subdued him quickly, throwing him to the ground and binding his hands. I screamed and struggled, but it was useless. We were caught. Father Tomas stood over Rodrigo's prone form, his expression triumphant. Rodrigo de Leon, thou art hereby arrested for apostasy, heresy, and the corruption of a bride of Christ. Thou shalt be returned to Spain to face judgment. And her? Rodrigo asked, blood trickling from his split lip. What shall become of her? She, too, shall face judgment, though I suspect mercy may be shown to one so clearly led astray by thy devilish influence. Nay, Rodrigo shouted. She is innocent. I forced her. I seduced her. Be silent, Father Tomas said coldly. Thy lies shall avail thee nothing. Ye shall both face the justice ye have so long evaded. They dragged us to a ship in the harbor, throwing us into the hold like cargo. The crossing back to Spain was a nightmare. We were kept separated, chained in darkness, given barely enough food and water to survive. I could hear Rodrigo calling my name through the wooden walls that divided us, and I would call back, though we could not touch, could not comfort each other. When we finally reached Spanish soil, we were taken in covered wagons to Toledo, to the dungeons of the Inquisition. There, we were separated entirely, and I did not see Rodrigo again for many weeks. My cell was small and damp, with only a wooden pallet and a bucket for my needs. Each day, inquisitors would come to question me, to demand that I confess my sins and implicate Rodrigo as the sole villain of our story. But I refused. If we were to be condemned, we would be condemned together, equals in our sin and our love. The torture began after the first week, nothing severe at first, merely sleeplessness, hunger, cold, but gradually they escalated. The strappado, where they hoisted me by my bound wrists until my shoulders screamed. The rack, stretching my limbs until I thought they would tear from their sockets. Through it all, I told them nothing beyond what they already knew, that we had loved each other, that we had fled together, that we regretted nothing. I do not know what torments they inflicted upon Rodrigo, but I could sometimes hear his screams echoing through the stone corridors, and each one was a knife through my heart. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps only 2 months, we were brought to trial. The courtroom was packed with clergy and officials, all eager to see the fallen inquisitor receive his judgment. We were made to stand before the tribunal, dressed in the yellow sanbenitos of condemned heretics, tall conical hats upon our heads to mark our shame. The charges were read: apostasy, heresy, fornication, breaking of holy vows, corrupting the innocent, fleeing justice. The evidence was presented: testimony from Sister Clara, from the guards who had discovered our absence, from Father Tomas who had pursued us. When asked if we had anything to say in our defense, Rodrigo spoke first. "I am guilty of every charge laid against me," he said, his voice clear and strong despite the marks of torture on his body. "I broke my vows. I loved where I should not have loved. I fled rather than face judgment. But I am guilty of no sin. For love, true love, freely given and freely received, cannot be a sin. If God is love, as the scriptures teach, then what Beatrice and I have shared is the most godly thing I have ever known. Burn me if thou wilt. Condemn me to hell. But thou canst not make me regret what we have had." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. The chief inquisitor, an ancient man with a face like a skull, glared at Rodrigo with undisguised hatred. "Thy pride and unrepentance do condemn thee most thoroughly," he said. "And thou, Sister Beatrice, hast thou aught to say?" I looked at Rodrigo, at his beloved face marked by suffering yet still beautiful to me, and I knew what I must do. "I say this," I declared, my voice ringing through the hall, "that I loved him, that I love him still, that if I had my life to live again, I would make the same choices. Ye may call it sin, but I call it grace. Ye may call it corruption, but I call it salvation. Do with me what thou wilt. Thou hast my body, but my soul remaineth my own, and it is bound to his for all eternity." The sentence was pronounced immediately. We were to be burned at the stake, our ashes scattered, our names erased from all records. We were to die as we had lived, together in our sin. They gave us one night before the execution, one final night in separate cells, to contemplate our sins and perhaps to repent. But Father Tomas, perhaps moved by some vestige of mercy, or perhaps simply curious, arranged for us to be brought together in a small antechamber, under guard, for one final conversation. When I saw Rodrigo, I wept. He looked so thin, so worn, yet his eyes still held that fierce light I loved. We fell into each other's arms, and the guards, perhaps moved by pity, turned their faces away. "I am sorry," Rodrigo whispered into my hair, "so very sorry that loving me hath brought thee to this end." "Be not sorry," I said fiercely. "Wouldst thou take it back? Wouldst thou choose differently?" "Nay," he admitted. "Never. Then we have nothing to regret." I pulled back to look into his eyes. "Tomorrow we shall die, but tonight we are together, and that is more than most people receive in a lifetime." We sat together in that small room, talking of everything and nothing, our childhood dreams, our fears, our hopes for whatever might lie beyond death. We spoke of the life we might have had in another world, where we had been free to love from the beginning. We spoke of the life we had briefly shared in Tangier, which now seemed like a beautiful dream. As dawn approached, casting gray light through the high window, Rodrigo took my face in his hands one last time. "In this life or the next," he said, "I am thine, and thou art mine." "In this life or the next," I echoed, "forever and always." They came for us when the sun had fully risen. The streets of Toledo were packed with spectators. The burning of a former inquisitor and his paramour was an event not to be missed. We were paraded through the city in our sanbenitos, while the crowd jeered and threw refuse, but I held my head high, and Rodrigo walked beside me with dignity, and we did not give them the satisfaction of seeing us broken. At the quemadero, the burning ground outside the city walls, 2 stakes had been erected. As they bound us, mercifully to the same post, so that we could face each other, Rodrigo smiled at me. "Art thou afraid?" he asked softly, so only I could hear. "Only of being without thee," I answered honestly. "Then thou hast nothing to fear, for we shall never be parted." The executioner, as was traditional, offered us one final chance to repent, to recant our sins, and accept Christ's mercy. If we did so, he would strangle us before lighting the fire, sparing us the agony of burning alive. Rodrigo and I exchanged a glance, and in that glance was everything: our love, our defiance, our certainty. "Nay," we said together. The executioner shrugged, and the torches were brought forward. As the flames began to lick at the kindling around our feet, Rodrigo looked into my eyes. "I love thee, Beatrice," he said, his voice strong and clear. "And I love thee, Rodrigo," I replied, feeling the heat begin to build. Now and always. The fire rose higher, and the pain was terrible, more terrible than I had imagined. But through it all, Rodrigo's eyes never left mine, and mine never left his. We were together, bound not by chains but by choice, dying not as sinners, but as lovers who had dared to claim happiness in a world that forbade it. And as the smoke filled my lungs, and my vision began to dim, I thought I heard him whisper one last time, "In the next life, my love, in the next life." Then there was only light, and heat, and finally, peace. The chroniclers who recorded our trial and execution wrote that we died unrepentant, cursed by God and man. But they know not the truth. We died as we had lived those brief, precious years, in love, in defiance, in a grace that no church could grant or revoke. If this tale hath touched thy heart, bestow thy favor upon this video, subscribe to the channel, and share thy thoughts in the comments below. To hear the next tale of forbidden love and sacred defiance, click upon the box to the left and let another story unfold.